What's up, designers, and welcome back to Rempton Games. Today, I'm going to be talking about a pretty complicated and controversial topic: the price of games. With that, I'll be touching on a number of other topics such as paid DLC, loot boxes, and subscription fees, and if those things make you mad, I just ask that you please hear me out and wait until the end of the video before leaving an angry comment. Without further ado, let's get started. Before we start trying to answer the question of how much games should cost, let's answer an easier question. How much do games cost? While this may seem like a very simple question, it's actually a bit more complicated than it seems. These days, a AAA game is generally going to run you $60 for the full price, but a lot of people are going to end up buying that on discounts and sales, so not everyone is paying the full $60 price tag. In addition, most smaller independent games are going to run a lot less than this, with many having no upfront price at all, and a lot of bigger games have deluxe editions that actually cost more than the $60. It's a lot of variability, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be focusing mostly on that $60 price, which is what most players expect to pay for a quote-unquote full game. And I use that word full intentionally. I believe that players have certain expectations when they pay that $60 price tag, that what they're getting is a total experience, with an adequate amount of content and appropriately up-to-date visuals. If the game is very short or doesn't stack up visually, then players tend to want to buy it for a lower price point. And unless the game is offering something extra, players seem pretty unwilling to pay more than $60 up front. But why is this? What's so special about this price that it seems to be the default that both players and publishers are unwilling to budge from? I can't say for sure, but there are two things that I know. Thing number one, $60 has been the expected base price for a game for the better part of 2 decades. And two, based on the various forum posts and comment threads that I read through while researching this video, there's a huge proportion of the gaming population that is vocally unwilling to pay more than this for their games. There have been experiments over the years with higher prices, but generally these higher price tags lead to significantly fewer people buying the game, and so $60 has stuck. Keep in mind, although the face value of games have actually stayed the same for the last 15-ish years, the actual cost of these games has actually gone down due to inflation. If you bought a $60 game in 2005, that's actually about the equivalent of buying an $80 game in 2020. Okay, so games cost $60 to buy, and that price likely isn't going up because raising the price would reduce the size of the market as well as piss off a good number of gamers. If anything, looking at things like Steam and the mobile market, the price of games is actually more likely to go down over time, and is definitely already going down simply by not keeping up with inflation. On the other hand, the cost of making games hasn't gone down. In fact, it's actually grown exponentially. To explain why, let's take a look at Moore's Law. Moore's Law is the observation that the number of transistors in an integrated circuit would double roughly every 2 years. This law was first observed by Gordon Moore, a founder of Intel, in 1965, and has mostly held true ever since, although in recent years there are some signs of slowing, and even Moore himself believes that the law may not hold true within the next 10 years. What this generally means is that computer processors have been growing in power exponentially for the last 50 years, and this has led to a massive explosion in technological power and innovation. 20 years ago, for example, we didn't even have iPods, and now the idea of a dedicated MP3 player seems like an ancient relic of a forgotten past. This brings us to another law, brought to us this time by a former chief technology officer at Microsoft, Nathan Myhrvold. Software is a gas. This means that software likes to grow and expand, and it'll get as big as it can unless it is somehow contained. The container in this case is the limitations of the computer. There's no point making a computer game that nobody's desktops can actually run. I'm looking at you, Crysis. As computing power improves, games simply can't help but try and improve with them. Simply look at the difference between Pong and Red Dead Redemption 2, and you can see the astounding level of progress that this industry has made in just a few short decades. This growth comes in many forms, from more impressive visuals to larger open worlds to more complicated AI. These bigger, more impressive games don't come for free, however. As computing power increased exponentially, so have budgets. In the 70s and early 80s, the cost of producing a game basically came down to hardware costs. They had to be distributed in big, bulky arcade cabinets or chunky cartridges, and the actual cost of developing the software was pretty minimal. In these early days, it wasn't unusual for a game to be produced by a single individual over the course of a few weeks. The real challenge was manufacturing, not software. As time went on, however, the cost of development began to grow. As computers improved, developers continued to push the limits of their hardware, and consumers began to demand more and more out of their games. Sprites and backgrounds became more complex until they were replaced almost entirely by 3D models. These 3D models started out quite simple, with a few polygons and very low resolution textures, but over time they became more and more complex. By the mid-90s, a AAA game would cost a few $100,000 to develop, and these costs had risen to over $10 million by 2005. Today, even the most advanced game from 2005 wouldn't be given a second look. Modern models can have tens of thousands of polygons, and textures that look good on a 4K Ultra HD screen require a lot more time and money to develop than the low-resolution textures of the past. These days, it isn't rare for a blockbuster game to cost over $100 million to make. So is the increased cost of making a game solely due to the increase in the cost of making assets? Mostly, but there are a few caveats. The first thing to mention is that a lot of developers are trying to fit more actual gameplay into the games, but the amount of code going towards gameplay has not risen to nearly the same extent as the cost of assets. The second caveat is that there's not a direct linear correlation between the amount of asset data and the cost of producing that data. The amount of data included in a game is actually increasing even more quickly than the costs. This is mainly due to the improvement of tools such as game engines and 3D modeling software that allow developers to create these more advanced assets more efficiently. However, although it's more efficient to produce these assets, this increased efficiency is nowhere near keeping up with the increase in demand. This higher cost of development has had a number of effects on the game industry. For one thing, the number of AAA games coming out each year has gone down dramatically. As prices went up, developers simply couldn't release as many games as they used to. In addition, similar to the movie industry, this increased cost has led to companies taking fewer risks and putting more emphasis on sequels, reboots, and franchises. Because each game represents such a huge investment, even a handful of flops could spell the end of the company. Countless game companies have already fallen victim to this, and releasing a known franchise with a built-in audience is simply less risky than an original IP. This is connected with another consequence of this rising cost. Fewer companies are making AAA games. As these blockbuster games get more and more expensive, the barrier to entry gets higher, which means that fewer and fewer companies are able to compete at this level. And as these higher costs drive more and more existing companies out of business, the AAA gaming landscape is going to get more and more sparse. So if games are so expensive to make, then why do they still cost $60? The answer is they basically have to. Even if you may be willing to pay $70, $80, $90 for the games that you want to play, the general public simply isn't going to accept it. This leaves you with two choices as a game company. Either try to reduce your costs, or find alternative forms of revenue. You can see both of these strategies at play in the modern gaming industry. There are a number of smaller companies out there producing smaller games and releasing them on platforms such as Steam or the Google Play Store. These games don't necessarily rely on a higher price tag to make money because they don't cost as much to make. The downside of this, of course, is that while these indie games have the potential to be very successful, the market is incredibly competitive, and a huge percentage of these games make next to nothing. Alternative revenue models are also becoming more and more common in modern games. In this context, the $60 that you pay for the game isn't really the price at all. It's more like an entrance fee that will be supplemented later on with additional forms of revenue such as paid DLC, loot boxes, or subscription fees. Now, I know that gamers tend not to be huge fans of these monetization strategies, to say the least, and I'm not going to say that greed is never involved. There are certainly companies out there that employ monetization tactics that I would consider not only to be greedy, but also manipulative and unethical. However, I think that's more of an issue with how these features are implemented, rather than an inherent problem with offering these additional payment options to your players. Keep in mind that offering options such as loot boxes is not just a matter of money, but of risk. Many game companies live right on the edge of success, where a single failure could mean the end of the entire studio. I've actually seen this myself firsthand. Last summer, I worked as an intern at Rooster Teeth Games, and during this time they were developing a game called Vicious Circle. Vicious Circle ended up being a flop, and because of that, almost the entire team of talented artists and developers was let go. Game development is a risky business, and adding these alternative forms of revenue to your games is a way to help even out this risk. If a successful game is still making money, then maybe your company won't go bankrupt if your next game doesn't do so well. So to finally answer the question, how much should games cost? The truth is that I don't really have an answer, and neither does anyone else really. This is still a relatively young industry that is changing fast, and must evolve as it grows. However, based on the way the industry is moving, it doesn't really seem like raising the base price would solve the problems the industry is going through. Even if prices doubled, it wouldn't necessarily make the development model more sustainable, and nobody would actually buy a $100 game anyway. If I had to guess at where game prices would go over the next several years, I wouldn't be surprised if prices continued to trend downwards towards zero, and smaller ongoing payments became the norm rather than a bigger upfront cost. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic in the comments down below. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this in the future. And join me next time where I take a look at a project I did a while ago and show you how to teach an AI to play Pokemon Emerald. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.